One of my favorite things in the world to do is watch Friends. I know it's been off for years and years. It's not even around, but I still find myself binge watching old episodes. And I was thinking about this today and thinking, it's the predictability of the friends in the circle, right? You have Chandler with his quirkiness, Monica with her type A of just everything has to be so neat and tidy and organized. It's Phoebe's ability to make you laugh at her silly songs. Ross always comes in with those smart comments, and Joey and him and his food, like it is just so hilarious. And of course, Rachel, she just brings everybody together, and it's just such this beautiful, cohesive team of people. And it's why I wanted to come on and share with you today that I have an opportunity for you to find your friends in the content creation space. So if you are thinking about creating your first or your next digital course, I don't want you to miss this opportunity because Amy Porterfield just opened the doors for registration for her Course Confident Bootcamp. And I'm actually offering a special bonus for anyone that registers for the Course Confident Bootcamp through my special link. So I want you to go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register. That's crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And what you're going to find when you get there is I have this special bonus private podcast series. It's called Money Mindset for Creators. So I want you to go register for Amy's bootcamp, download the podcast, and immediately start listening to it, because what this training is set up to do is to help you get your mind right about monetizing your content, making money so that you can fuel your content creation dreams. So go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register for Course Confident. And I cannot wait for you to find your friends and find the people that will be there for you. Do you see what I did there? Yeah, nice little friends segue connection. Go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And I cannot wait to see you inside. Okay, let's get into today's episode. One of the things that I love about traveling to conferences and meeting people in person is having the opportunity to chat with someone above and beyond just a quick casual conversation or the typical, where are you from? Like, what do you do? You know, some of those conversations can feel very surface level and like they don't really have a lot of meaning behind them, right? Like everybody knows what I'm talking about. You go to a conference, a networking event, and you're looking for people to make genuine connections with. And sometimes that happens and sometimes it doesn't. And that's just really the name of the game. And that's the name of business and marketing and meeting new people in general. And I have to say, over the last few years, it's become even more awkward post-pandemic. And it's just one of those things that we're all trying to navigate and learn together. But today, I am so thrilled to share with you a genuine conversation from someone that I did meet at Podcast Movement Evolutions earlier this year. And we really hit it off. We actually had multiple conversations about life, about business, about navigating new journeys. And if you're someone that's interested to learn more about life coaching or coaching in general and what that looks like, then you are going to love today's interview with Jen. So I met Jen at Podcast Movement Evolutions in Vegas earlier this year, and we get into that in our conversation. But it was just so fun and refreshing to sit down and talk to someone who genuinely loves to help people. And I cannot wait for you to understand more about life coaching and what that looks like and coaching in general, because I think as podcasters, we can take so many of these attributes and use them in our conversations with guests or working with people in our communities. So let's get right to it. Welcome to the Profit Podcast, where we teach you how to start, launch, and market your content with confidence. I'm your host, Crystal Profit, and I'm so excited that you're here. Thanks for hanging out with me today, because if you've been trying to figure out the world of content creation, this is the show that will help be your time-saving shortcut. So let's get right to it, shall we? All right, Profit Podcast listeners. I feel like I'm introducing someone that I've known for a lifetime, but in reality, we just met a few weeks ago. So welcome to the show, Jen. I'm so happy that you're here.
Oh, thanks so much. I know you have that personality where you're super easy to talk to. You just draw people in. So it does feel like we've been friends forever.
Oh
So
gosh,
fun.
it's so mutual. And actually, I didn't want to tell you this before we started recording, but Seth, my husband, says hi. Like
Oh,
Jen and Seth, it was so funny because Jen and I first met at Podcast Movement. And it was so funny because I felt like the three of us just kind of bonded like super quickly because we all just have these personalities of like, let's just be real. That's what it felt like. It was just so authentic. And unfortunately, we don't see so much of that these days. It's very polished, or someone's trying to sell you something, or it's like it's not a real connection. So I just have to say hi from Seth, and I so appreciate meeting you at Podcast Movement. It was so great.
oh, so fun. Well, hi back.
But tell us about your journey. So people are listening and they're like, okay, so she was at Podcast Movement. That must mean that she's this podcaster that's been doing it for years and years, and she has millions of downloads, and she is just a rock star podcaster. I want to know. Tell us about your journey. Tell us where you
Yeah.
are in your
So
podcast
I
journey.
I feel like I'm probably the least experienced guest you've ever had on your show. So the biggest thing I want people to know is that none of what you just said was true, right? Like I do not have a huge audience. I do not have tons of viewers or listeners. I do not even have a lot of episodes. I'm not exactly sure why I'm here, except to tell everyone like, just start. Like, it is I think we are living in a time that is so remarkable because the accessibility of putting our voices out there is
Yes.
so different than any other time in history, and even different than 5 years ago. And I've heard you talk about this on your podcast, Crystal, how the technology has changed. So, like 5 years ago, BC, before COVID, I went to the library and I like rented the room and got set up on, I don't know, I think it was probably GarageBand, and like used their, they were kind of gross, like headphones, like community headphones, and sat down and tried to record a podcast in the like green room of the library. Well, fast forward, you don't need any of that, right? Like we don't have to go somewhere because the technology is literally on your phone or on Zoom. It's just, I feel like it's changed so quickly that it truly is a platform that is accessible to all of us. And it's a very low cost to get started. And the biggest thing is you have to get over yourself. You have to get over your own brain. And that has been the biggest the biggest thing that has allowed me to just get started.
Oh, we're absolutely going to circle back to that because you have so many awesome tips on coaching people through just getting started. But I want to go back to your comment about the gross headphones, because now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, but that was before COVID and we didn't care. And I think only after COVID do we actually care about sharing or touching
That's true.
handrails or touching things. So it probably wasn't even a big deal. It was like, oh, like pre-COVID, post-COVID, like the whole thing.
That is a good point, right? But it wasn't even the headphones, it was like the mic, like all of it was shared
All of it.
equipment. And you
Exactly.
had to like make a reservation, and it was like a whole thing, and I had to have like the library like digital person show me how to use all of this stuff. And it's just so simple. We did publish I think 3 or 4 episodes, which felt like a big deal, right? Like so and I think I want to acknowledge that too.
Yeah.
Even though it's simple, that doesn't mean it's easy,
Mm.
because again, it's like we have to overcome our own brains and to celebrate, even like sitting down to record that first one, celebrating everything along the way has
Yes.
been a huge part of what's helped me just keep going. Because there's a lot of times, and I'm really curious for you, Crystal, like, do you always want to record? Because I don't,
Ooh.
and I've only done 15. 1-5.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good question. I don't know. I think I've kind of talked about this maybe in passing. I don't know that I've ever done anything that's like just dedicated to when you don't want to record or how to like just show up anyway, even when you feel like crap, you don't feel great. I think that one of the things that I will do is I'll look at my calendar, right? So I've got my podcast calendar, and if I pull it up and I don't have the energy behind the subject, if it's a solo episode and I'm like, I really don't want to talk about that today, then I will switch and talk about something else that was in my calendar. So maybe I'll do things out of order. But if I physically like show up and I'm like, I have no energy, I kind of have to coach myself into it. And that could look like different things. It could look like me like doing jumping jacks and like, okay, I'm tired, or I got to go have another cup of coffee and then I'll record and I'll be ready to go. Sometimes it looks like standing up. So I'm so lucky. I love my standing desk. So I will stand up, and that helps the energy kind of go through me and I can get through it. And then there's days where I'm like, I absolutely don't want to record. I feel like crap. Maybe I'm sick. Maybe I'm on my period. I don't like, there's so many other things that could happen, but I just say, what is the absolute minimum that I can do to add value to my audience, to still stay consistent? Because that's one of my big commitments is how can I stay consistent? And so I'll shorten everything and I'll say, you know what? I only have a 10-minute episode in me today, or I just have 12 minutes, or I'm going to use a pre-recorded question from somebody that submitted something a while back. And that's what I'm going to talk about. But I just love the idea of not being so rigid with it has to only be this way. Like, let's make it work for you and what you're doing. So that's a fantastic question. How has that shown up in your journey? I mean, you say, well, I've only done 15. Y'all, 15 is the big deal. That's a milestone, because some podcasts stop after 1, some stop after 7. So celebrate all of those. But have you had any of those experiences along your journey?
Being a woman in business comes with its own unique set of challenges, but also so many opportunities. We get ahead by leaning in to what makes us different from business as usual. I'm Samantha Hartley, host of Profitable Joyful Consulting, inviting you to a special 6-episode series exploring the experience of being a woman in business. You want to hear from women consultants who've hit $1 million, who sell 6-figure engagements, or who've broken their own revenue ceilings? Yeah, those are my clients, and they'll be sharing too. Join me for 6 must-listen episodes that tackle key challenges for women consultants.
Follow Profitable Joyful Consulting on your favorite podcast app.
Yeah. So as a newbie, I love hearing you say like, oh yeah, I experienced that too. Because I think like just starting out, there's like an idea in our head, like, well, everyone else knows exactly what they're doing. They have it all figured out and they always want to show up. So it's like, oh, okay. You have a human brain too. That is so reassuring to me.
Yes.
So yeah, I've tried a couple different things. I've tried recording like a couple in a row, and sometimes that works really well. And sometimes I'm like I did one in the car where my daughter was at violin and I was sitting in the car and I just had this idea and I'm like, I'm just going to record it and get on and talk about it. And I didn't have the right equipment. It was on AirPods, but I think it's being intentional about like what I have to say is still important. And I would rather have it be a little bit unpolished, a little bit imperfect, a little bit B minus than to not do it at all. And that is something I've really had to be mindful of because I really want it to be good. And so like training myself to be willing to like let it not be great. Training myself that in the beginning, I don't exactly have my voice yet. Training myself that when I don't want to do it, I can still show up. I can still offer something, like you were saying, even if it's a shorter episode. So, yes, sometimes I don't want to record. And again, 15 episodes so far, I'm still able to like coach myself, walk myself through it because it's attached to a broader goal. And the goal that I think about is I do a lot of like public speaking and workshops. And so I think of the podcast as it's like the love letter to the people in the audience who were like, what did she say again? what was that thing? What was that story? Like, this is where you can hear it. This is where you'll like get your memory sort of like triggered for something that you saw in person. So that's what I love about it.
Oh my gosh, that's such a great. I love the idea of the love letter piece because it's almost like the off stage, like the unscripted conversation that you want to have. I mean, I'm sure Jen, you've had this experience so many times where you go to a conference, you go to an event, and then someone speaks, they do an incredible job. Maybe you have all these notes, maybe you have all these ideas, but where the magic is being able to go up and ask them like afterwards, like, this is my specific question. And I think that like thinking about your podcast in that way is like, I did this thing or I work with these clients because I know, and we're going to talk about that. You work one-on-one with people in different capacities of coaching. And so hearing this feedback, hearing these questions, you can actually collectively say to an audience, I see these all the time. And here, if this is you, if you have this question, here's how I would tackle it if I were in your position. Or this is my advice to you if you're going through this. So there is, I think that's what makes podcasting so special because it's such an intimate experience. So I would love to hear how that's translated. So give us a little background on coaching and how that role plays into your podcast journey.
Yeah, so I discovered coaching probably like 2017, 2018. I'm divorced, I was remarried, and I started to see some of the same patterns showing up that I saw in my first marriage. And I remember having this thought like, I wonder if it's me. Like, I wonder if
Mm,
I'm the common denominator. I wonder if there's something here that I should be looking at. So I found actually a podcast, started listening to a podcast. Then I found coaching from the podcast and started getting into this world of like looking at your brain, looking at your thoughts, coming at life with a little bit more intention. And I'm like, oh, it is my brain that's holding me back. This is the reason why I'm struggling in my marriage again. This is the reason why I'm struggling to I don't like have better relationships, right? Like struggling to get the results that I know I'm capable of, but it's like that feeling of just being so stuck. So
mm,
as soon as I started coaching and being part of that, like just being part of that world, I'm like, this is amazing. Everyone needs this, and I want to be part of it. So I got my certification to be a coach, and I've just been working with people one on one. I started out as so this is kind of interesting. I started out coaching brides, like brides to be, because at the time I was thinking, gosh, if I could give brides like these skills, then maybe they wouldn't get divorced. Well, it turns out most brides aren't super interested in not getting divorced when they haven't even gotten married yet. So I had a little bit of a marketing mismatch there. And then I moved into like relationship coaching, specifically around infidelity, which was really interesting and a place where I felt like I could really make a difference. But I don't think I like totally nailed the marketing. And it was a little bit of, because there's so much shame around infidelity, it was a lot of almost like educating the audience that coaching
mm,
was something that could be helpful. And then I moved into where I am now, which is coaching leaders. And what I love about this space is that I have experience coaching in shame. And that is something that keeps so many leaders stuck. It keeps us
mm.
from like speaking up in a meeting, right? Something kind of small to like something big, like wanting to apply for the next job.
Yeah.
And if we can untangle some of those beliefs that we don't even know are optional, like it can skyrocket someone's career. It can also show up at home, help you be like a more loving partner, show up as a parent in the way that you want. Like all these things just open up. It's like that feeling of, I know I can do more. I know I can be more. I just don't know how. I just feel it's like I feel so stuck. Like coaching can really unstick you. Is that an
Yeah.
expression? Unstick
Yes,
you?
yes, we are going with that because it's so great. And like so much of everything that you're talking about, I'm like, I have 1,000 ideas of different ways we can take this conversation, but I want to kind of take a step back for a second because I understand the coaching world because of who I've chosen to surround myself with. I am surrounded by motivated mentors. I follow people that have coaches. I have learned from coaches. I've listened to podcasts about coaching. But if someone's listening right now, because this is actually a question that my husband, like I talked about Jay Shetty one time was on a podcast that I loved. And I said, oh, this podcast with this interview with Jay Shetty, it was really great. And I said, he's a life coach. And he said, What the heck is a life
What's a
coach?
life
Like,
coach?
what is that? So can you explain? Because he said, well, isn't that just a therapist? Can you tell like what the difference is? So if somebody's listening and they're not clear what that is.
Yeah, I love that question because and it's interesting, right? Like we used to say the word coach and we all thought like Kiwi baseball or like
Yes,
soccer.
exactly.
And now it's
Exactly.
starting to shift a little bit where I think life coaching is becoming a little bit more like part of our vernacular.
Mm-hmm.
So the biggest difference is therapy is amazing and wonderful and super helpful when you're trying to uncover like how did I get here? Or
Mm-hmm.
like if I've had some traumatic events in my past, which PS, everyone's experienced some sort of trauma. So if there's something that I want to explore, like from my past, that's a really good place to go is therapy. Coaching is a little bit different because it's more like, okay, well, this is where I am now. This is what I'm still thinking about it. So we're not necessarily going back in time. We're not trying to untangle like what happened then. We're approaching it from this is where we are now. What are we thinking about that event now? How is that event showing up because of our thoughts in the present moment? So I'll give you an example. When I was like in third, fourth, fifth grade, I remember thinking like I'm not great at math. And there were a lot of cultural messages that sort of supported that idea that girls aren't great at math, girls aren't great at science. Now it has changed. I think we've done some work trying to get girls into STEM. But at the time in the 70s, it wasn't like that. And I remember even like there was a Barbie that like her little message was like, math is hard. That's
Oh
what we
my
were taught,
gosh. Oh my
right? So it was
gosh.
like this cultural messaging. Plus, I was developing this evidence that I wasn't great at math. So
Mhm.
fast forward, now I'm in college, and I was like, I went to the counselor and I remember specifically saying, find me a major where I don't have to take any math because math is hard and I'm not good at it. And
Mhm.
I went to UW Madison. I don't want to be at a Big 10 and take this math class with 500 people. So I was directed to journalism, which was a great major for me. And I don't have any regrets about it. But I regret that no one questioned that belief. No
Mm.
one questioned, like, why do you think you're not great at math? And then we go through our careers, right? So like the first time I had to do a financial report, immediately I was like, well, I'm not good at math. I don't think I can understand this. I don't think I'll be able to explain this. And it's subtle at that leadership level, but but as long as I carry that like that perspective of myself, that story of myself, it's going to keep showing up. And every time I reinforce that belief, it just gets a little stronger. It gets a little easier to access.
Yeah.
So it's not something that I need therapy to
Mhm.
diagnose or to change, but coaching can help me find that thought and be like, oh, well, that makes sense that I'm always uncomfortable in financial meetings because I'm thinking I'm an idiot when it comes to math, and I can point to all this evidence and all these reasons why that's true. So coaching can help like identify that thought pattern and start changing it. So now I'm like, oh, bring it on. Right. Like, and I remember thinking, how did I become a journalism major that deals with spreadsheets literally every day of my career? Like, what did I do wrong? And even right as a solopreneur, like knowing your revenue, knowing your numbers, like math is looking at the analytics of your podcast. It's
Yes.
understanding, it's interpreting. And I never would have recognized that that was holding me back if I wouldn't have had coaching to like help untangle that thought pattern.
I think that's probably the best explanation. So we have it here. It's recorded. You can go back and listen to this episode anytime you're like, wait, what is life coaching and what is therapy? Because that was such a great explanation. And it's a visceral reaction, right? Like hearing you say that, because I have experiences in my life where I'm like, oh my gosh, like I could think back to the story I was telling myself about, oh, you're not good at that because of this one time, or because so and so said, or this happened. And so I think that really grounding everything into that helps us all understand it better. So thank you so much. You did that. You did that so well. But I want to ask, how does that translate into your podcast? So tell us what your podcast is about and how you use that with the experience that you have helping people through coaching. Tell us the name
Yeah.
of your
So
podcast first. Yeah.
my podcast is called Think on Purpose. And it's really because like that's what changed everything for me is being deliberate and intentional about my thoughts. Instead of just like kind of going through the world, like la la la, I have like things are just happening to me. When I realized I actually can choose what I'm thinking, I was like, wait, what?
Yeah.
I'm in my 40s and I'm just learning this. Like this feels like kind of a key concept that
Yes.
like maybe would have been beneficial to know earlier in my life. Like what do you mean I get to think on purpose, right? So it's like recognizing again those unintentional patterns, like and recognizing you get to decide now. Like part of the fun of being a grown up is you could have ice cream for breakfast and you could decide to like totally change what you think about your past or what you think about math or how you look at the world. And I think that is so fun and a very like it's like an underutilized skill. Also the ice cream is probably an underutilized thing. But like we forget, like being a grown up has so many opportunities and it's so
Mhm.
fun. And we get to decide, like, all of this is made up. The whole thing, it's all just made up. It's all just a
Yeah.
bunch of rules from someone else's brain. And we get to do whatever we want in our relationships, in our jobs, in our parenting, where we live. All of these are decisions that we get to make. And I just find that so freeing that I can release what I don't like anymore, release what doesn't serve me, and start to think on purpose.
I love this concept. I love it so much. And I love that, Jen was telling me when we met at Podcast Movement, we were talking about her podcast and all the fun things. And it was so fun. So we didn't talk about the origins of our relationship. So Jen was actually the volunteer. She volunteered for Podcast Movement and she was in the room. What was your official title? You were like the
Yes.
mic runner, the show
I was
runner.
the
What was your name?
yeah, the room manager.
A
Yeah.
room manager. Yes. So she was making sure people were on time, not going over. And so we got to chat before and then we had lunch afterwards and we had all these different interactions in between, but it was so fun to hear about the different things that you were going. And so this might've been day 2 or 3. You said, I'm so excited. I have a really big guest on my show. And like, I'm going to be interviewing her soon. And I'm really nervous. And if you have any tips. And so I want you to share a little bit about how that unfolded so early in your journey, because I'm sure that there was stuff in your head like, am I ready to have someone of this caliber, this level on my show? Or just tell us, first of all, who that person was, who that special person is. Cause I want people to go, it was an incredible interview, by the way, like as someone that got to hear behind the scenes of, you're so excited about it. It's fantastic. It's so awesome. But also I want to hear, how did that unfold? Did you reach out to their team to make that happen? Or what did that look like?
Yeah. Okay. So can I talk about podcast movement first?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So I just want to mention this to people because I think it's important. It's so easy for us to be like, well, I'll never be that. I'll never be a podcaster. I can't do it. So when we recognize like how we see ourselves, like we might use the word identity, I made an intentional decision. I was like, okay, Q1, I'm going to start a podcast and then I'm going to this podcast conference because I will embody the identity of a podcaster. And I think I had, I don't know, three episodes out at that point, but it didn't matter because I was a podcaster and I had practiced that identity up until that point. And to Crystal's point, I was not on stage. I came by myself and I wasn't a participant. I came as like a volunteer because my thought process was now I get to meet the speakers. I get to be in the room.
So
It's like a little
smart.
Hamilton. Like I get to be in the room where it happens. And I came by myself. So I thought, well, this is a great way to meet people and to just like be embedded and like be one of them. Like I am a podcaster. I deserve to be here. I'm in the right room. And so that was like a really big deal for me. So I just want to offer that for all of the listeners. How can you start thinking about yourself as a podcaster, even with one episode or with 300 episodes? Like, what is that next identity that you want to embody? Because if we start picturing ourselves as that first, it becomes so much like easier to take the steps along the way. So that's the first thing I want to say. So Corinne Crabtree, she was my amazing guest. She has like, I don't even know, millions and millions of followers and downloads. She is like amazing. So she started off as a weight loss coach and now she also coaches coaches to build their businesses because she is a multi-million-dollar coach. So she came on my podcast, and the way that it happened is she's launching a new program. So she put a call to action in a Facebook group. She said, I want to go on a podcast tour. Here's the application if you want to apply. And I think at that point I don't know, 2 episodes in. I maybe hadn't even launched the first episode. And I was like, well, you're a podcaster. So,
You're a
right, like back to
podcaster.
that identity. Like the worst thing that they say is no.
Mm-hmm.
And that is like a trait of mine that I love and hate, that I'm like, well, I'll just jump in and do it. And then when she said yes, it was like, oh shit, like
I gotta
this is
figure
real.
this
Like,
out. Yeah.
like now what am I going to do? Like now I have to I have to go through with this. It seemed a lot easier when I was like, well, it probably won't happen. I'll
Yeah.
just do it. It'll be good experience and applying for podcasts. So she's so generous. I think she said yes to everyone who applied,
Yeah.
but it never would have happened if I wouldn't have taken that action to apply. And I wouldn't have taken the action if I wouldn't have had that belief in myself. This is who I am now, and I'll figure it out. It's like those two things are really what has made the biggest difference. So she came on and we did a 45-minute interview, and I have not perfected any editing skills yet. So it's like unfiltered. That was the interview. And then launched that and marketed it and put it out into the world. But it feels really amazing to be able to say that I did that.
I mean, first of all, I'm impressed. Like I said, I mean, for you to say, okay, I'm going to be a podcaster. This is what I'm going to do. If I would have told you 6 months ago, because it's not, I mean, we're recording this at the end of April. It hasn't even been 6 months into the year. If I would have told you in December and I said, Jen, looking ahead in 2023, you're going to sit down, you're going to have a 45-minute conversation with Corinne Crabtree. What would you say?
Yeah. And then also then Crystal's going to ask you to be on her. And I'd be like, what? What?
What are
I
you
would be
talking
like,
about?
yeah. Right. And
But,
I'd
yeah.
love to tell you that I would have been like, well, obviously,
Obviously.
but I was not at that point. I was still like formulating this idea, formulating this like identity of like, this is what I do now. This is a way that I serve my audience. This
Yep.
is a way that I can put my voice out. And there's so many things, and you did a great job teaching this at the podcast movement, like all the things that we have to overcome in order to actually be willing to put our work out into the world. Like one of the things I remember you said is nobody likes to hear their own voice. Like
Yes.
it can be painful, but don't let that stop you, right? Other things that have come up for me is like, well, I don't really have a story. Like how many people are thinking that they don't have a story, and it's not true.
Yeah.
Thinking like, well, I don't know what to say. I don't have time. It's all these things that our brain just loves to offer us because it feels a little scary. It feels a little nerve-wracking. And the truth is, they're just excuses. Like the truth is that you can let your brain have those ideas and then just go ahead and do it anyway and prove your brain wrong.
Oh my gosh. I feel like that is such a permission slip and like a gem to give to everybody that's listening, because I want to recap for y'all exactly what Jen did. She claimed, I'm a podcaster. She went out and took action and said, I'm going to submerge myself into this world, see what it's about. I'm going to learn. But then you also weren't afraid to say, my podcast is important enough, not big enough, not popular enough, not it's important enough that I could bring value to Corinne. She could bring value to my audience. And now you can say, I've had Corinne Crabtree on my podcast. Like that's incredible,
Right?
because I think that there's so many people that are listening right now that they're not in the new stages. They're in the beginning state, or sorry, not in the beginning stages. They're in that, maybe 50 episodes in, maybe they've been doing it for 12 months, maybe they've been doing it for 2 years, and they still don't have that mindset because they're telling themselves, I don't have millions of downloads still. I don't have this. I don't have that. I haven't had big name guests. When I do have these other things, that's when I'll make that big ask, or I'll request that I'll have these big people on my show, but I'm not there yet, because I see that a lot in this audience. So I just want to applaud you for putting yourself out there, even though it's scary, right? Because you're like, I don't know. Maybe I'm going to embarrass myself. Maybe I'm going to look stupid. But you have that shame training, right? You've got that.
Right.
You know how to deal with that. So I just want to say, I'm super impressed by that. Like it's
Aw,
awesome. It's so awesome.
thanks. Well, and like if anyone is in that headspace, like
Yep.
hashtag same, like I think
Yeah.
we're all in that headspace. The only difference is it's like being willing to do it anyway,
Yep.
right? And
Yep.
not waiting. And I'll tell you, so I've had 15 episodes and I hit 500 downloads. And I was like,
Yay.
oh, should I tell her? Like 500, like that's nothing. Like that's so small. And then I start comparing, like, well, how many has Corinne had or how many has Crystal had or what about this coach that I
Yep.
know? And it's like, no, stay in your
Hmm.
lane, celebrate your success. Like someone else's journey isn't really my business,
Yeah.
right? Like, and the more that I let that distract me, it just feels terrible. I would rather feel like amazing and excited, like, and celebrate. Like, I celebrated 10 downloads, like
Yeah.
50 downloads, 100 downloads, even, when I launched in February, like 500 downloads seemed impossible.
Yeah.
So it's not about like comparing yourself to other people. It's about comparing yourself to you and where you started. And I literally started at zero,
Yeah.
zero downloads, zero episodes. And it's like every time I do it, it gets a little easier. Every time I do it, it's like that thrill. Like, let me peek. Oh my gosh. I went into, your analytics and it was like people have listened to your content for like 300 hours, something like that.
Yes.
And I was like, "What? Come on. 300 hours of listening to me?" Like that feels very like it's like so humbling, right? Like
Yes.
like 300 hours of people's lives, like that is a lot in
Yeah.
my opinion right now.
Yeah.
And why wouldn't we love that? Why wouldn't we
Yeah.
love on ourselves for that instead of being like, well, I'll celebrate at 1,000 hours. I'll
Mm.
celebrate when I have 10,000 reviews. Like, why? The numbers are completely arbitrary. It's like we were saying, it's all just made up.
Yeah.
So why not celebrate at one? Like, what's the downside of that? I cannot think of any.
Oh, I mean, and that's such a healthy mindset to have because even yesterday I was talking to someone and they were saying, well, I'm getting thousands of downloads every episode, but it's still not like it's not good enough. They were totally like poo-pooing on everything that they've done up to this point, and they've worked hard and they've done all of this, and they're just like, but it's still not good enough. And I kind of told her, I was like, it's never going to be good enough, right? Because you'll get to a point where all of a sudden you're getting 10,000 downloads, but it's not 50,000. And then once you get 50, it's not 100,000 and you're not even at 1 million. So it's like the mark is always moving. It is
Yes.
always going to move. So I think having that healthy mindset of exactly what you just said is like, I'm serving the people that need to hear this message and just
Mhm.
staying grounded in this is what works for me. This is the value that I can bring and add to the people that are here and showing up. And that's all that we can do. Everybody listening, that's all that you are required to do is show up and add value to your audience. And people will keep coming back for that. Totally.
Well,
Yeah.
but it's like, how many times in our lives do we tell ourselves that? Like, oh, well, I did a 5K, but it wasn't a half marathon.
Yes.
Oh, like
Yeah.
I made dinner tonight, but it
It
wasn't
wasn't. Yeah.
organic. I don't know, whatever.
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
it's like we dismiss all these things that we do instead of like just celebrating. Like, I'm a rock star. Like, I got up,
Yeah.
I like kept it, like I like did the things for the house, I did the things for the kids, I did some work, I served some people. Like, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And we're just so quick to dismiss all the hard work we do. So I would offer if you are a podcaster and you're like noticing that pattern of dismissing yourself, start practicing in your
Mhm.
podcast, right? Start practicing like celebrating. I did another episode. I got another listener. I got a download. One. That is all we have to
Yeah.
celebrate is one. And just notice like how does that change your energy for your podcasting? How does that change how you show up? And then, like, what if you slowly started extending that to every area of your life? Like, it could be amazing how different that would be in 6 months or a year.
Oh, it's such a good, again, I feel like this is like permission slips. Like Jen's got like a prescription pad and she's just writing permission slips. Here you go. Here you go. Left and
Yeah,
right.
like
Because
go have fun and
yes,
enjoy, right? Like enjoy
yes.
all the things that we are working so hard to create. Otherwise, like what's the point?
Yes, 100%, 100%. Oh my gosh. Well, I just have to know, like, so you've hit this big milestone, right? Because we used to say, okay, if you can get to this point, then like it's great. You haven't burned out or quit podcasting. So you're at this really critical point in your journey of, I kept going, even if it was hard. I kept going, even if I didn't know what I was doing. So I'm curious now that you've been doing it, because I get this question a lot. It's usually around when someone's been podcasting for 3 months, they'll say, I think I want to change the name of my show, or I think I want to tighten up my audience. Maybe I want to broaden it, or I want to change my format. Maybe I want to go longer or shorter, do interview solo. So, have you had any of those things come up in your journey that now looking forward, you're thinking, I may change things or I'm going to keep everything that you set back in January when you were planning all of your stuff?
Yeah, I think it's kind of like an and both. Like
Yeah.
like I want to keep myself open to what feels good and try new things because
Yeah.
I didn't intend for it to be an interview show, but when I've had guests on, I'm like, oh, this is so fun. I really like
Yeah.
this. Like, even if it's like, even if it's sometimes interviews and sometimes not, like, again, I'm the one making up the rule.
Hmm.
So giving myself, to use your word, like that permission to just
Yeah.
keep playing. I've thought about like, do I do different seasons? Like, oh, this is like, I don't know, a certain theme or something like that could be fun, interviewing like certain types of guests. So I think there's plenty of ideas, which feels really amazing to be like, oh, there's so many directions to go and so many
Yeah.
fun things to play with. Haven't thought about changing the name of the show. Every episode length is a little bit different. So I
Yeah.
haven't even really thought about like what's the goal there. And I think it's just, yeah, like how do I just like keep it fun? Because I
Yeah.
think the audience, like they feel that. And how do I just keep showing up more as myself? Like I remember you saying in at the conference, like bring yourself and tell stories. And I felt very convicted because I'm like, oh, all of mine are like 3 ways to have less stress, 6 ways to be more resilient. And I'm still kind of in that pattern, but I can feel like I'm loosening up a little bit more. I'm
Hmm.
telling a little bit more story. And it's like the thing that holds me back is I have kids who they provide me with a lot of great stories, but
Yes.
I'm like, "Oh, don't tell that story, like, I don't want to embarrass the kid," or so it's like finding that balance. So if you have any advice about that, like how do you tell your stories without like embarrassing people or like calling out my kids
Yeah.
specifically?
Yeah. I always think of like the comedians that are like self deprecating, right? Like they just always, so I can give you my personal example. It's like I'm super clumsy. Like if you meet me in real life, there's a likelihood I'm going to spill something or I'm going to trip over something. And maybe that's the story I've told myself, but it's the truth. And I blame it on, I have like a depth perception thing. I don't really know what it is. I'm just clumsy. We're just going to call it what it is. And so I like to tell stories. It's like, oh my gosh, I was doing this thing and maybe you've done this before. And, just the other day, actually, this was 3 days ago when we're recording this was 3 days ago. I was shutting the shutters like in our living room because it was nighttime. And I was like, oh, we hadn't shut these yet. And I hit my shin on this like really sharp corner of this bin that we like keep blankets in. But that's a story. I just shared with you a story. It's like I'm clumsy and I just like this is what I do. I gave you it's like it's all in the detail of how you share it and what pieces of it are relevant and how can you pull your audience into that. So you share the pieces that are like, oh, well, people know what it's like if you have your blinds open and it's nighttime. You're like, oh, I don't want anybody looking in, at least that's how I am. I'm like, I don't want anybody looking in my house. So I'm gonna go shut all the blinds. And in doing so, just kind of quickly, I ended up smacking the crap out of my shin to where I'm like screaming. I'm like my 7-year-old's right there. So I'm like, no profanity, like trying like holding back the F
Hold
bombs
it
because
in.
they're coming. I'm like, they're coming. They're right there on the tip of my tongue. So it's like all of these little pieces of humanity. Like this is always my biggest thing is I agree. It's hard to tell stories. My my oldest is a teenager, like getting into that where it's like, I don't want to share stuff that he's going to say, Mom, oh my God, don't ever share stuff about me. But I always just go with the approach of what am I comfortable sharing? Like what pieces of my humanity can I put out there that I know people will say, oh my gosh, that's so relatable, or I've been there, or what is something that maybe they haven't been there, but they can understand because they have someone that's been in that situation. And because I am who I am, I don't mind embarrassing myself. So I will tell embarrassing stories. I'm like, oh my gosh, because I have the relationship with my audience. And I think that this is important with my topic and who my audience is, because I've met so many of them, like in person, like through our Facebook group, like in chat. Like I have talked to so many people in our audience. They've told me, you are so relatable. And so in hearing that from many people, I think, well, I need to keep telling relatable stories because my audience, they eat that up. They want that from me. And so I intentionally, when I'm planning content, I say, where can I throw something in? Where is there a story from the last week? Is there a story from my past? Is there a story from an interaction that would play into what I'm already trying to tell without it being a distraction? Because I think that that's where a lot of people get tripped up, is like, I feel like I'm telling a story, but how does it tie into what I'm talking about or what I'm trying to do? So does that answer your question, or kind of like lead you on a path that can make that easier?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And like, I'm with you. I'm happy to embarrass myself. Like when you were talking about closing the blinds, I'm like, oh, see, I'm the person that when I walk by, I'm like, their blinds are open. What's going on in there?
Exactly. So you're the one that I'm
Definitely.
closing. You're the reason I'm closing my
Yeah.
blinds,
So
Jen.
it's well founded. But it's like,
So
yeah, so
funny.
it's like finding those little nuggets. And I think that's probably like my next evolution, which would be helpful, is like using some templates and being a little bit
Yeah.
more thoughtful in how I'm planning content and what stories I'm adding in. Like I'm pretty good at the education piece. And so now
Hmm.
it's like blending it, letting that personality come out a little bit more, because it feels like, okay, it's time to record the podcast. Now I'm going to show up in this, like, I don't know, like expert energy, and
Yeah.
I can feel it. Like I want to teach you this thing versus like, I want to teach you this thing and we're going to do it in a unique way. We're going to do it in Jen's way. Like, I think that's probably like the next evolution
Yeah.
of how I'll change. And it'll be super fun to listen back to like those first couple and be like, oh, that's so cute. Like, look how
Yes.
cute past Jen was. I just adore her for getting us
Bless her
started.
heart.
Bless
Yes,
her heart.
exactly. But I think that that's what's so cool about it, because you hit on a keyword there. It is an evolution. Like I will tell people to go back. I don't know if you've listened to my first episodes. I always tell people to go back and then I cringe because I'm like, please don't go back. I really don't want you to, but they're there. They're still all there. You can listen to I've never taken any of my episodes down. You can go listen. You can hear how scripted my first solo episodes sound, how there was no story. There wasn't a lot of pizzazz added to it, but it comes naturally over time when you start getting that feedback from your audience. When they say, oh, Jen, we loved when you shared about this previous client that you helped because I saw myself in their experience, or it was awesome how you shared these practical step-by-steps. And you also gave us tools, like maybe there were actual books to go read or resources. So you'll start to find those little pieces that your audience just eats up. And then you can cater in your own unique perspective on it. It's like, oh, we're going to talk about this, but we're only going to mention it because I have that listed in the show notes. So I know we don't need to go into a deep dive because you're going to go grab them. And there's other strategies behind that too. And we're not going to get super technical into that today, but I think that, to your point earlier, there's no rules. I love that you said that. I'm like, this is why I love you, Jen. Like, this is why we immediately became best friends, because I have said this from the beginning, is there are no rules in podcasting. There's guidelines and there's a few things you have to do in order to have a podcast out into the world, but you can do whatever the hell you want. Like in reality, you can do whatever you want with your show. So I love that you pointed that out.
Yeah, it's like so freeing to be like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Like it's my show. I get to decide, but it sort of goes back to what we were talking about before too, of like the celebration. Like
Yeah.
it's my show, it's my rules, it's my content, it's my brain, and I'm going to like not be excited or not celebrate. Like
Yeah.
that doesn't even make sense.
Yeah,
And I'm holding
exactly.
myself to some metric that I'm making up. So why would I get upset with myself that I haven't
Yeah.
hit a metric or a deadline that I'm making up? Like it makes no sense. And we do it all the time. That is why everybody needs a coach. Everybody needs somebody to
Yes.
be like, time out.
Yeah.
Let's see what's going on in there. Let's see what's happening in that brain.
Yeah. Well, what you really meant to say is everyone needs to go listen to your podcast so they can check out all of the
Yes.
awesome things that you are sharing, because I love what you're doing. I think that you are sharing a very unique perspective on coaching, and you have, again, to use the word so many times in this interview, is relatable. Like it's very down to earth. I do recommend, if anybody's going to go listen to Jen's podcast, go start with her interview with Corinne, because it was so awesome. I enjoyed it. I loved hearing, because I'm a numbers nerd, and Corinne does such a good job explaining the behind the scenes of her business too. So if you follow Corinne for a long time and you want to know more, like go listen to that episode, because it was so good. But I have a few rapid fire questions that I wanted to
Okay.
end on today. So are you up for those?
I'm ready.
Okay. All right. The first one is, what piece of advice would you give to a brand new podcaster?
Um, just like do it and keep doing it. And the more, right, really, the more you do it, the more confident you feel, or I shouldn't even say more confident. The more you do it, the less terrible it will feel.
Yes.
And like just keep showing up. Even if it's just your mom and your like partner listening. It's fine. Like you have to start. And I love like part of what draws me to your podcast, Crystal, and your work is that idea of like we all start somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Like we all start somewhere. So it's fine. It's amazing. Like doing it is so much more fulfilling than thinking about it in your head. So
Yeah.
keep going.
That's awesome. Yes, totally agree. The next one is, what is the dream podcast you would love to be on, and who is your dream podcast guest?
So dream podcast, gosh, I feel like there's a lot of them. I definitely want to come back here in like 6 months or a year. Like, let's see what's different. Like, that would be amazing. I would love to be on the Life Coach School podcast. That's where I got my certification from, my training from. So I think that would be awesome. Um, it's like those are probably my top two right now. And
And then who
then
would you want to interview? Who would be your dream guest?
guest, I would say. I mean, Brene Brown's got to be like
Oh,
in the
yes.
top, right? Like that would
Yes.
be amazing. And maybe this is because of like my generation, but like I still have to go Oprah. I mean, like she's
Yes.
like
I love it.
iconic, right? Like how much could
Yes.
I learn from Oprah or Brene Brown or like there's so
Yes.
many powerful women who just another one would be like Shonda Rhimes, right? Like talking
Oh,
about like
I love
changing the
Shonda
face of
Rhimes.
entertainment,
Oh my
like
gosh.
be
Yes.
amazing.
Well,
So
will
if
you
they're
invite me?
listening,
I want to be in the background of your Shonda Rhimes interview, because I'm a huge fan, huge fan. So I'll be your producer for that one. Yeah, we'll make it happen.
done.
We're putting it
I'll,
out into
I'll
the universe.
Yes, we're manifesting right now. We're
Yes,
picturing it.
it's going to happen. It's going to happen. Okay, my last question is, do you consider yourself a perfectionist?
I consider myself a recovering perfectionist. I spent a lot of time not doing things because I was afraid I would fail,
Mm,
which people don't often understand that that is perfectionism.
mm-hmm.
Like I only did things that I knew I was already good at, and so I missed out on so much. So it kind of goes back to your first question. If you want to podcast, like be willing to make mistakes, be willing to say the thing that makes no sense, be willing
Yeah.
to it's not even failing, right? Because again, it's your show, you're the only one deciding if you're failing, but like be willing to be a beginner, and it just opens up so many opportunities, right? Like who would have thought a couple months after we met that I would be able to be a guest and have this amazing conversation with you and be able to point people to this body of work that I'm creating. And it can't be because of we're trying to be perfectionists. It has to be
Mm-hmm.
because we're willing to screw it up and learn as we go. So I am
Oh,
recovering.
that's so good. So good. And like I said, Jen, you have dropped so many permission slips, so many truth bombs, and just little gems that I know that everyone listening is going to appreciate today. So thank you so much. Where can everybody find you and learn more about your podcast?
Yeah. So find my podcast, Think on Purpose, on all your podcast platforms. And I'm also on Instagram, jen.fry.coaching. I drop lots of little nuggets, life coaching tips, and would love to have you come follow me over there and definitely listen to the podcast. Let me know what you think. I'm looking for that feedback, building that audience, all the things. So I appreciate it so much.
Yeah. So we'll have all those links in the show notes. But again, Jen, this was so fun. I loved catching up with you. And I'm like, we're going to put it on the calendar. I'm like, oh, we're going to follow up. We're going to have a follow-up call in the future and say, how's it going? Like who's the next, but did you talk to Shonda Rhimes? Like we're going to follow up on all the things in the future,
Yes,
but
I love it.
Thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much. It was great to be here.
I knew you were going to love Jen. We had so much fun talking. I loved how we were able to have our little casual conversations whenever we were chatting at the conference, and then to have the follow-up conversation about her big interview that she had with Corinne Crabtree and just so many other things. Like Jen is great. Thank you so much again, Jen, for bringing your wit, your wisdom, and all of your incredible insights to this community, because I have so many more questions and we'll likely have to have you back on the show again, because I love learning about her podcast journey and all the ways that it's unfolding organically on the timeline that works best for her. And I just know, like, if you're looking for a coach to help you be more of a go-getter or put yourself out there, go learn more about Jen. We're going to have everything in the show notes for you to learn about her coaching and what that looks like. And I want you to go check out what she has to offer, because if you can't tell from this interview, trust me when I say she is very easy to talk to and she's incredible. And even the few interactions that we've had, I have started to think about things differently and see new, fresh perspectives on how I can look at my business and even my life in a new way. And I think that those are the key pieces that coaching can really help you in those areas. So make sure you go check out Jen, go to the show notes for today's episode. But if you're brand new here, this is the first episode you've ever listened to for the Profit Podcast, thank you so much for tuning in. I would love it if you would hit that subscribe or follow button wherever you are listening to this podcast. And if you would, I would love it if you would take a screenshot and share it on Instagram. Tag me, tag Jen, and let us know what your number one takeaway is. You can put that in your Instagram stories, and I cannot wait to see what you thought about today's episode. But that's all I have for you today. So as always, remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. Hey, Profit Podcast listeners. Thanks for sticking around to a little bit after the episode to hear this special message, because I want to hear from you. We are starting a new segment called Fan Mail Shoutouts, and I want to hear from you, and I want to hear your questions. What do you want to know? What questions have you been dying to ask me? So here's how to make this happen. Go to the app where you're listening to this podcast right now. Go there. I'll wait a second. Okay. Now, once you're there, you're going to see a hyperlink at the top of the episode description that says, send Crystal a text message. And that's all I want you to do. Send me a text. It could be casual, informal. It could be totally anonymous. Or if you want, you can include your name and the name of your podcast or content wherever you are creating, and I will give you a special shout out in an upcoming episode. So again, go to the show notes for where you're listening to this episode right now, and it will say, send Crystal a text message. And I cannot wait to hear from you and give you a shout out in an upcoming segment of Fan Mail Shoutouts.